Awesome. So let's go over our agenda for today. We're going to start off by opening up with the risk of misconfiguration. What are the implications of not having your Azure environment tied up? And what have our experts seen in the field? Then we're going to move into how to build a secure foundation. What is the mindset you should be taking, as well as the best practices. Next, we're going to move into monitoring and automating responses, where we'll dive into Azure Monitor and Azure Policy. And last, we'll finish with actionable tips for getting started. But that's enough from me. I will let you guys hear it from the actual experts. So let me have the pleasure of introducing our esteemed panel. First off, we have Jorge Morales. He is our Azure Pre-Sales Architect. We also have Adrian Bellin, our Azure Project Coordinator, and we have Nicholas Wallace, our Technical Sales Manager. Nico, I'm going to pass it off to you to talk about your experience in the field and get started with our awesome presentation today.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Happy belated Easter. We're here to talk about Azure security and what that looks like. So you guys may see me as a familiar face. I hosted last webinars for modern work security, and then also foundational security for with Intune and Entra and Defender. Now we're going to kind of switch the coin here and talk about infrastructure security, what that looks like within Azure, and I brought along a couple friends. First and foremost, Jorge, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, kind of talk about your experience in the space and what you've seen, and then we'll go ahead and move on to Adrian.
Yeah, as Nico said, my name is Jorge Morales. I'm Azure Pre-Sales Architect. I've been, before this, for the last 14 years, I've been working in the Azure space. Before that, M365. So for the last 10 years, I've been consulting in this space as an Azure architect, working in different industries, from insurance to healthcare, financial industries, and oil and gas. So looking forward to talking about some of the things we've seen out in the field.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Jorge. Well, Adrian, if you want to go ahead and unmute and present yourself too. Adrian is one of my project speakers, my project coordinators, and he works on the fulfillment and delivery side of the house as well. But go ahead, Adrian, and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Good morning, everyone. As Nico mentioned, I'm Adrian Blen, and I'm Azure Project Coordinator here at Trust Tech Team. As mentioned, I facilitate a majority of the Azure projects and at the project management level to ensure delivery is met at its highest level. I've been previously acclimated with, software development, and I look forward to hopefully working with some of you in the near future. Back to you, Nick.
Perfect. Well, thank you everybody for attending. Now that you guys have met my team, I'm going to go ahead and let's begin. Let's kind of highlight why we're talking about this. What's the risk associated with this? I think this is going to be a very powerful slide for a lot of folks. But let's go ahead and break down into some numbers and why we're talking about this, right? Starting to the left, we have a couple statistics here that we pulled from different sources that kind of highlight why this is super significant to be looking at, why there needs to be a very, very, very sharp lens on this, right? Starting to the left, we have a stat from Rapid7. 57% of Azure VMs have exposed management ports. Typically what we see is RDP or SSH. These ports are like a prime target for brute force attacks. Attackers love to go fish for public IPs to maybe something you're hosting externally, an application, a front end. You never know what you really have out there until you start looking at it, and you just don't know that it's exposed until you review all your network security rules, right? Point two. 40% of Azure environments have overly permissive service accounts. This is where security falls really silent. Over permission identities, you can have a multitude of GAs across your environments, different roles. This is where RBAC really comes in handy, and implementing a really good RBAC practice is going to solve a lot of these problems, right? 4.8 million dollars in cost related to an Azure breach. So when we did this report, we pulled this from IBM Cost of Data. They reported about they reported that number when there is a specific breach inside an environment through an Azure infrastructure. This is the cost of damages that typical customers have to they pay out. right? And then the last service is 80% of organizations have at least one misconfigured Azure service. According to Palo Networks, these things are typically like storage accounts, network rules, misaligned roles, things where we don't have Azure policy or Azure blueprint to help standardize and enforce those guardrails. But I'll let Jorge kind of break down what he's seen inside the industry and just kind of do a high level of the most common misconfigurations inside Azure tenants.
Yeah, thank you, Nico. So these are the most common misconfigurations that we've seen throughout, different industries. So the first one is unrestricted public access to storage accounts. So allowing anonymous public access to storage, i.e. like a blob container in Azure can expose sensitive data to the internet. So this usually happens when when the access level is set to blob anonymous or read access, or your SAS token is misused. Why is it risky? So like public data leaks often exploited in ransom and data exfiltration attacks. So a perfect example of this is a storage blob container containing customer invoices, PDFs. PDFs accidentally set to public. So you'll have a malicious user discovers the URL via search engines, indexing, and downloads all files. So the second one, overly permissive network security groups. So NSGs act like firewalls for Azure VMs and subnets. So misconfigurations often look like allows traffic from any source IP, allow inbound traffic to all ports using the any source destination inappropriately. And what this does is increases the attack surface and exposes VMs to brute force or RDP SSH. So a good example, a VM has an NSG rule allowing inbound RDP from port 3389 from your like a quad zero rule. And this exposes it to the internet-based attacks like Bluekeep. The third one is lack of multi-factor authentication for privileged users. So admins or users with elevated permissions who only use username and password combos are a high value target. So MFA significantly reduces the risk of credential-based attacks. So an Azure AD global administrator logs in without MFA and their password is leaked in a credential dump. So attacker gains full tenant access. Number four, misconfigured role-based access control, RBAC settings. So assigning owner or contributor role broadly, giving everybody owner rights. Assigning roles at subscription or management group levels unnecessarily, not following least privilege principle. And what this does is it leads to privilege escalation, unauthorized changes or access to sensitive data or services, and it's hard to audit. Number five, disabled or insufficient logging and monitoring. So logging and monitoring are essential for detecting anomalies, and investigating incidents. So a common issue is not enabling diagnostic logs for Azure resources, Azure Monitor Log Analytics, Defender for Cloud Alerts. And so what this does is there's no visibility into actions or changes. So delayed detections of breaches or policies. So a good example is a key vault is accessed, has access by an external IP, but without logging enabled, the team doesn't realize credentials have been stolen until weeks later. Next slide.
Yeah,
Of course. Well, thank you,
So,
Jorge, for kind of understanding and bringing that level of understanding and providing some real world examples. But yeah, go ahead, Adrian. I know you had something to share on this too as well.
Yeah, of course. As Jorge mentioned, these are just some of the most common misconfigurations you see, but I've had the privilege on working with the delivery team, working across the client base. Every single person's environment is different and requires its own specialized configuration. And what we can promise from our end is that our engineers are fully committed to not only learning your environment, but ensure you have that well-architected framework going forward. So, ensure the job's done correctly and ensure continued success. So, Nick and Jorge, in terms of the well-architected framework, what are some things that they should look into, and what are some things that really flush that out?
Well, yeah, I mean, let's break into, like you mentioned, well-architected framework, and that's I think breaking that down and explaining that to some of our viewers here is going to be kind of essential into identifying how we're going to implement it. What does it mean for your organization? What does it mean for any type of cloud practice that you're running? Realistically, the well-architected framework is a cloud blueprint, so it's not specifically Microsoft related. It is applied to Microsoft Azure because it is a private cloud, but essentially you can apply this to any type of concepts of cloud computing. So essentially, it's building out infrastructure that is high performing, resilient, and efficient, right? And then also, most importantly, secure. So maybe you won't hear the term security a lot in the well-architected framework. It is innately assumed when you look at the concept, right? So let's overview the 5 pillars of what a well-architected framework is. The first pillar is cost optimization. So this is more than about saving money. It's about designing systems that are aware from day one, using RIs, auto scaling, shutting features on and off, things of that nature. Understanding that when you are producing in the cloud, you also can subsequently produce waste, right? And that's a big concern for a lot of people who are adopting cloud today, right? Second layer is security, right? Security is baked in. It's not bolted on. You can't just throw on products on top and assume you're secure. You have to bake it in when you're developing the infrastructure, right? This includes identity management, encryption, threat detection, compliance, things of that nature. If you got things like public IPs, legacy access controls, this pillar is going to help you understand that you need to put controls around these aspects, right? Then we move down into reliability. This ensures that the environment can recover quickly from for failure, right? Having a BDD, disaster recovery plan or redundancy and strategies or regional failovers built in as you're designing helps you keep your uptimes up, provide service to your customers, making sure that we're providing all of these things that we need to adhere to, right? Next and fourth in line is there's operational excellence. This is dev operations, right? This is monitoring, alerting, automations. This may not sound security focused, but it's super important to standing up resources to a gold standard, right? We want to make sure that we're in continuous improvement, and so we're staying ahead of the curve for attackers, right? And then last but not least is performance efficiency. This gives you, going into the cloud, you have a lot of, I would say, elasticity when moving there, and it's easy to overspend and under-architect resources, right? So this pillar really helps you choose the right resources to help scale intelligently, and then also make sure your apps are performing under pressure, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the essence of well-architected framework. You're allowing yourself to build this framework and this ground, this foundation to achieve excellence when you're developing out your operation here. So I have enough speaking for me. I'll let Jorge kind of talk about his experiences implementing WAF across the environments, right?
Yeah, thank you, Nico. So implementing well-architected framework, the WAF, right? So, and we're talking, around security. So the first thing, align cloud environments with Azure Security Benchmark and best practices. So the Azure Security Benchmark, ASB, is a Microsoft curated set of security recommendations based on industry standards. So think NIST or CIS, think NIST. The well-architected framework uses ASB to guide secure by default implementation. So ensuring that all virtual machines have endpoint protection and vulnerability scanning enabled, that's an ASB recommendation. Applying least privilege using RBAC and enforcing MFA across all administrative accounts. And the second one identifies misconfiguration vulnerability early. So the WAF assessment uses tools like Microsoft Defender for Cloud and Azure Policy to detect issues proactively. So example, discovering that a storage account allows public access or an NSG are exposing ports like port 22 or 3389. So number 3 strengthens identity, network, and data protection. So by assessing identity networking and data handling through WAF, you can enforce that zero trust principles and segmented network architecture. So a good example is like for identity implementing conditional access policies to restrict access on risk level networking. You're thinking using your Azure firewalls with NFGs to isolate workloads by tier. Think your web app DB tier. And so for data, apply Azure Information Protection, AIP, and customer managed keys for encryption at rest. So for number 4, so provide actionable guidances to improve security posture. So WAF isn't just theoretical. It outputs practical, prioritized recommendations, and you can implement them immediately. So often backed by things to secure score, as we were speaking on earlier. So a perfect example is, hey, enable Defender for Key Vault. Well, how's that action? Action is to turn it on for Azure Portal or via ARM template. So another one, apply diagnostic settings for app services to log analytics. So like creating a policy or manually enable logging. The 5th point is support secure by design principles across workloads. So secure by design means security is built into your cloud architecture, not retrofitted later. So the WAF ensures that workloads are designed with guardrails and governance from the start. So we look at that, and that's when we come in early and we say, hey, we're going to build your landing zone. We're thinking security first. So a perfect example is instead of allowing dev teams to deploy resources ad hoc, you define blueprints and templates with pre-configured security controls. I think Bicep Terraform with policies integrated. Enable continuous security improvements through regular assessments. So cloud environments are dynamic, right? Things change. WAF assessments aren't a one and done. They should be run continuously or regular intervals to track improvements and catch regressions. So think running monthly WAF reviews with a cross-functional team, using Azure policy initiatives to automate or automatically remediate or alert on drift from best practices. So, our talking point here is really security starts with architecture. WAF gives us the why behind security design. So it's not about adding security later, it's about building it into and from the start.
Yeah. I mean, remember, guys, we're not talking about, a web application firewall that's a common other term for a WAF. We're talking about well-architected framework. It's not just a checklist, right? There's plenty of things that we can develop around, creating this, framework that applies to all our resources. It's a mindset, right? You need to holistically change the way you are thinking about infrastructure to structure your cloud strategy as intentional and as as reliable as possible, right? But if that seems daunting task, come talk to me, come talk to Adrian, come talk to Jorge at Trusted Tech Team. We're gonna pretty much provide you guys the mindset, the mentality, lay out that framework for you, and we'll go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Now that we've kind of, gone into detail, and thank you, Nico, for that clarification between, the different WAFs there are, but we've gone into detail on what that well-architected framework is. I think it's poignant that we discuss how that kind of ties together with the different policies and resources available in Azure. So, to start, I think a great place to look is, the actual Azure Secure Score. This is, a security analytics tool within Defender for Cloud, which provides, native recommendations on strengthening your security posture. But with that being said, Jorge, could you kind of explain and delve into what are some of the things that you can use for Defender for Cloud?
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Adrian. So, our first step is make sure we enable Microsoft Defender for Cloud. So what is Defender for Cloud? It's a cloud native security posture management, CSPM, and a cloud workload protection platform, which provides secure score, as Adrian was speaking on, which is posture benchmarking. It does continuous assessments for your Azure environment. It does threat detection for workloads, VMs, SQL, storage, Kubernetes, security recommendations to remediate issues. So for instance, you onboard an Azure SQL and Defender alerts you that the transparent data encryption TDE is not enabled. A VM is exposed to the internet via RDP. Defender recommends enabling just-in-time access and reducing the NSG exposure. Another example, so number 2, applying network security controls. Defender for Cloud reinforces strong network security practices by monitoring and advising on network security groups, Azure firewall configurations, your Azure DDoS protection, Azure web application firewalls, Azure private link to avoid public exposure. One thing I do want to point out as well, they do integrate well with third-party firewalls as well. So in a perfect example, you're hosting an app with a public endpoint. Defender would suggest using a web application firewall protection or moving it behind Azure front door. And then 3, secure virtual machines. So VMs are commonly targeted by attackers. So Defender for servers, which is a Defender for cloud plan, enables just-in-time VM access, which would restrict RDP and SSH to specific time windows and IPs. It looks at patch visibility, so alerts if OS patching are missing. It gives you malware protection and endpoint detection and response, so EDR. And our fourth point here is encrypt data at rest and in transit, right? So encryption is fundamental to protecting sensitive data in cloud environments and on-prem. So at rest, we're using Azure Disk Encryption for VMs, SQL TDE for SQL servers, storage encryption with customer managed keys or platform managed keys in transit, so enforcing TLS 1.2 or above, and using VPNs for secure communication between networks.
Beautiful.
Yep.
All right, so now we're going to move into what does Azure Monitor, Workspace Analytics look like? Also, what does Sentinel look like? So, what are some of the? So we've set up our mindset. We've changed that. We've kind of implemented our first line of security. Now, what are the resources that are going to help us monitor, maintain, be in constant alert mode, and give us that kind of critical information we need to continue to scale our operations, and then just highlight some very some bigger threats. I'll let Jorge kind of break down a little about what Azure Monitor with Log Analytic Workspace looks like, how KQL is super powerful in when it comes to querying out and doing advanced hunting and advanced threat hunting. But I'll kind of let him break down what experience he has within standing up a resource like this.
Yeah, so for me, Log Analytics and Azure Monitor is one of my favorite tools to use in Azure. So what is Log Analytics? So Log Analytics is the engine that drives security and monitoring tools. So it brings all your logs together, lets us act on them with alerting and automation, and connects everything from Defender to Sentinel, and third-party tooling as well. Think Datadog, think Splunk, right? So it says, first thing, it centralizes logging and telemetry. So it reduces those silos and centralizes troubleshooting. So it gives operations, security, and DevOps teams a single source of truth. So logs from an Azure web app, Azure firewall, and on-premise server are all sent to a single log analytics. And now we have Log Analytics Workspace, and now we have all our logs there. So if an app is failing, logs from the app, VN, and underlying OS are all viewable in one place. Mm-hmm. And 2, enables powerful query with Kusto query language, KQL. Why does that matter? So KQL allows for fast custom filtering and drill down. So you can do a query, shows the top 5 IPs triggering failed RDP attempts in the past 24 hours. You can create a dashboard that tracks CPU usage spikes across all VMs. And then 3, supports proactive alerting and automation. So Azure Monitor alerts can be set up to watch for specific conditions. So think high CPU usage, like I said earlier, failed logins. So you can automate responses using action groups, right? Which is the email, SMS, webhooks, Teams. You can use logic apps, runbooks, remediation workflows. And what this does is it helps respond to incidents before users report them. And it supports auto remediation and ticketing integration. So think Jira, all those different ticketing systems. So an example is, say I have an alert triggers for a storage count is accessed from another country, or like a CPU usage, it hits 90% for 5 minutes, and Azure Logic app scales up to do VM skew automatically. And then 4, it feeds into security insight into Microsoft Sentinel. So Sentinel is, so Log Analytics is the data engine behind Microsoft Sentinel, which is Microsoft's SIEM SOAR, and it collects and normalizes logs, allowing Sentinel to run analytics, create incidents, and orchestrate responses. So a custom Sentinel rule detects multiple failed logins and across sources in under 60 seconds. So this is probably the most important thing when we look at this is number 5 integrates with Azure Monitor, Defender, and more. So Log Analytics is a shared foundation across Azure's monitoring and security stack. So Azure Monitor for performance and availability, Defender for threat detection, Sentinel for SIEM, and App Insight for app performance. So what it does is it helps unify observability across your infrastructure. So an App Insight for your API runs through log analytics, alongside infrastructure metrics and Defender alerts, providing full stack visibility.
Yeah, I mean, like Azure Monitor is a really flexible tool. I mean, outside of, the parent needs for security and collecting and ingesting all the incidents, alerts, investigations, all that fun stuff. It also integrates really well with other places like you mentioned, functions, application insights, event hubs, Power BI, third-party platforms. So whether you guys are highly focused on security or performance or cost, definitely having Monitor like built into your practice is going to help, level up that foundation. Okay,
Great.
I know. Yeah, I know you wanted to break it down a little bit into policy, Jorge. And then let's go ahead and break this down for them as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Azure policies, right? So, the big takeaways here: enforces security baseline automatically. So Azure policy lets us enforce industry standards, which is important. I talked about earlier. So think about healthcare, HIPAA. Think finance, SOC 2. Think federal FedRAMP. And I know there's a lot of other stuff that we talk about in M365, and now coming to Azure side with Azure Gov. So it works with it lets us enforce industry standards like Azure Security Benchmark or CIS across our environments automatically, and that ensures every new resource is aligned with our security expectations from the SOC. And what it does, it gives you that denied non-compliant deployment, so we can stop risky resources from being deployed in the first place. So say, hey, I don't want virtual machines being deployed outside of the United States of America. We can create a policy for that. And what that does is when you even if you do it through a pipeline deployment, it will fail. Audit existing resource for misconfigurations. So even after resources are deployed, Azure policy continuously evaluates them. If anything drifts from our security posture, like missing encryption, disabled firewalls, we get flagged for remediation. This is important. We were talking about that well-architected framework and things that we utilize to not cause drift. This is a perfect example. This is a perfect tool, Azure policies, enforcing those guardrails around what we want to happen, especially around security, and apply policy that scales. So one of the biggest benefits is scale. We can apply these policies at the subscription level, management groups, which ensures consistent performance across teams, apps, environments. So that's that cloud first approach, right? I want my dev team to do what they need to do. I want networking to operate the way they need to operate, but also I don't want them to do anything that will put our business in trouble. So remediate security risk with policy initiatives. So initiatives let us group related policies, like all those needed for endpoint protection, and it automatically deploys agents or applies tags to sensitive workloads. So helping us stay secure and organized.
Beautiful.
Yep.
Yeah, beautiful. I mean, this is kind of like layering it on top of Monitor. We use Azure Policy to, ensure that automation is built up to a T. But I think we want to highlight some couple of real world examples. Jorge, I know this is going to be a very important slide for them as well, because you're going to go ahead and say identify some projects or potentially some engagements that we can do for security examples.
Yeah, so I mean, the first one, require MFA for all role assignments. So when I started out consulting, I started at the state local government. They were the first ones to start rolling out MFA. And when I started, it was in 2017. And there was a politician who had her emails leaked, and it caused some issues in her political career. And I remember doing a project in Maine, and the Attorney General of Maine said, I do not want my emails or anything being leaked. And the first thing they did was require MFA for all role assignments. So the second one, deny public IP addresses on virtual machines. Believe it or not, this is seen a lot, right? So creating policy, these are policies you can create that make sure, hey, we deny this public IP address, so it doesn't happen. We don't even have to worry about it. Require encryption on storage accounts. By default, it's not set. So requiring encryption is kind of one of those, security 100 things that you want to do. Deploy Microsoft Defender for Cloud Agent. Like we spoke on earlier, a lot of industries that, especially in healthcare, that I've seen, will deploy Microsoft Defender for Cloud specifically around compliance, because what Defender for Cloud does is it evaluates your environment based on on the compliance or HIPAA compliance or SOC 2, and then audit uses of deprecated TLS versions. We know, especially with developers, they may not be as secure conscious as you would think. And so setting these policies, so our dev teams and our different application teams, testers are using the correct TLS versions to in their applications and in transit.
Perfect. I mean, you've seen the layered security model now, from everything from visibility, from detection visibility to even foundational work. Now I'm gonna kind of break down into a little bit about Sentinel. Sentinel's my baby. I've had immense experience deploying this. I've deployed this in enterprise organizations, collecting, gigabytes upon gigabytes of logs from things like firewalls, down to applications, down to defenders. And then what we do typically after that engagement is we then allow a MSSP to go ahead and tie onto the backend of Sentinel to go and do investigations on those logs. But kind of, introducing Sentinel, right? It's a very powerful tool. It's a cloud native SIEM solution that allows you to monitor your operation effectively. It ingests data from third-party Azure, on-prem, other cloud, and it gives you actionable insights, right? So essentially, what I'm going to use Sentinel after I've done developing all my policy, my defender for cloud, everything that we've kind of talked about previously, is I'm going to use Sentinel as a way to cut through the noise, right? One of the key benefits of Sentinel is to figure out, filter out the fatigue that you get from alerts, right? You're constantly getting pinged, anywhere from Teams to, a message or down to an alert from a security alert from your defender. You want to be able to identify alerts that are going to truly matter, right? And you have helping you zero in on active threats instead of chasing down a rabbit hole, wasting your time, losing cycles on that, right? Another really big portion of Sentinel would be the real-time detection and automation behind it, right? So if you go and you break down to Content Hub, you'll see over a ton, I would say hundreds of pre-built connectors, things with Meraki, things with Azure Security, other applications out there. Palo Alto Networks has a connector. And this is where you can, they have pre-baked content to deploy workbooks, analytic rules, playbooks. These are automations that go and perform remediation tactics for you without, as they detect an alert, right? So they're super important to, essentially multiplying yourself as if you're like a security analyst or you're running a network operation or security operation, right? The last point I kind of want to break down is how it's cloud native, right? It's born in the cloud. It scales elastically. It's great at managing infrastructure. You only pay for what you use, and you can start small with a trial. Even I think you get, correct me if I'm wrong, Adrian, I think it's 60 days for free so that we can ingest logs in, understand what kind of capacity we're going to be operating at, what size of logging that we are, what kind of data we want to connect into it. And then from there, it just grows into this monster of a machine that essentially runs your entire security operations, right? So it's an ideal SIEM for organizations that want flexibility, they want speed, they want advanced analytics, and they don't want to compromise on security, right? So, you're looking to implement this across your SOC, come talk to us. We've built this from the ground up. We've helped customers scale this out and help it integrate it with MSSPs. But, I've talked a lot about this, but yeah, Jorge, if you want to, kind of highlight some experience that you've had in this as well. I know you've done a couple of deployments.
So what's interesting about Sentinel is that Sentinel is cloud native, but also is utilized on premise. So this is an Azure service that I've worked in setting up for organization that is AWS only, but wants to use Sentinel, or they're on premise and they're multi-cloud. And I think a lot of it is too is, so if you compare pricing for Sentinel to Splunk, this is going to be a cheaper option, right? That's one. But the other thing too is that it allows you to ingest data from anywhere, right? AWS, from other SIEMs, and then it's automation, that machine learning in the background gives you those playbooks to automate what you're trying to do, and it gives you really those playbooks to secure your environment. So I just want to point that out, that Sentinel is not necessarily just, hey, I'm in Azure and I'm utilizing this. Actually, it's pretty impressive that they've actually gotten this to be used, in a multi-cloud sense, or in a, hey, I'm in AWS or I'm on premise, but I really want to use this tool.
Yeah, I mean, to break down the licensing, I know there's a lot of Q&A about licensing or just general licensing that happens within Azure. So there's a couple different forms that you can do, right? So essentially licensing here, when it comes to like Microsoft Defender for Cloud, that's going to be based on a, per, I would say, uptime on server. Everything is consumption based. Same with Sentinel, as I mentioned before, it is all based, you can start really small, so there is no minimum fee that you need to pay or per month license user, right? It's all based on how much data we are injecting into the service, how much information we're monitoring, how many runbooks how many connectors. It's really designed to scale with how big your operation is. And that is very inherited across all of Azure. So it's all based on a subscription. It's all based on consumption. There are a few SKUs out there that are based on capacity units. You'll see things like Fabric, things like Copilot for Security, all based on these things, these new, I would say, subscription models such as capacity compute units, security units. And that's where you kind of lean on us on a partner, because Microsoft doesn't make it very inherently easy to identify how many of those units that you need. So that's where you can talk to a licensing expert like myself or your account manager. The architects are also well informed about how to do it. But yeah, just come talk to us when you guys need to kind of vet these solutions out, because we will boil it down to the best possible way to scale this environment for you. Okay, so we talked about all the different pillars of security, talked about WAF, we talked about Azure Policy Monitoring, and Sentinel. I would like to present you, or Adrian is going to present you, a use case on how we've done this for customers from a holistic view, right? I can talk about resources. Me and Jorge can talk about resources all day, but I'd love to hear, kind of a use case. Maybe this kind of resonates with you guys, and, let Adrian break it down for you, and what, businesses and verticals that we've solved problems for.
Yeah, thanks, Nico, for that. So yeah, as you know, we talked about Defender, we've talked about Sentinel, talked about log analytics, different product lines, use cases, and concepts, across Azure. But the way to really look at it is that's just one small piece of the pie overall for implementation and development. So, tying it all together, I've been fortunate, in my time here on delivery with, Trusted Tech Team to work on different engagements. But one I think that is I can quickly highlight that kind of drives all those components together on Azure, and for one solution, we were challenged, help deploy this web application that was dedicated to logistic trafficking and data for, field drivers on the field. Chief concern for that was untrusted network, unauthorized access, and data breach, a lot of the things that Jorge targeted on earlier. To solve this, it is employing both M365 and Azure, employing on-site authentication, employing conditional access for identities and user devices, making sure the web application is going through Azure App Services and trafficking, routing traffic through a virtual network, setting up private endpoints, so unauthorized IPs aren't able to access, making sure to utilize things like TLS 1.2 plus for the data that's traveling into the Azure SQL database, further leveraging, transparent data encryption, encrypt those files, leveraging custom managed keys and Key Vault alongside, a specific web application firewall for the web apps itself, and then additionally, for all the data analytics and everything, we also leverage Fabric reporting using the medallion architecture model, which we're very versed in. So outside of just Azure security, implementation, design, if Fabric is also something you're looking in again to, we're more than happy to assist on all those fronts.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of architecture isn't like a one size fits all. I think that's the point we're trying to get to, right? When we look at Azure in a holistic sense, there isn't like a specific license you go for or a specific resource that you're constantly going for. Everything is adaptable. Everything is, it needs to be designed to be functional, right? So with this, architecture, as we built out this application, it was not only secure, it was optimized, it was fully monitored, it was a way. We were thinking about protecting the data and powering that team at the same time as we were building from the ground up. So that's essentially, what me, Jorge, and Adrian, our jobs are. So solutions architects, just to craft these for you. Really understand, like, what does the business need? How do we make it secure first and foremost? And then also, how do we make it efficient? So it's just common, that we get into these conversations for us to kind of go back and forth with you to understand what resources are going to help you bring you to that finish line and solve this problem that you're having.
That was great. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you guys for sharing your expertise on Azure security. Remember, we also do Azure security consultations with the Trusted Tech Team expert. So they'll get into the environment and give you some best practices and suggestions. You can actually click that link that's on the screen. I know some people are having some issues with seeing the screen, so we will drop down that link in the chats to make sure everybody can get there. We also have a really exciting webinar coming up. I'm personally really excited for this one. This is Microsoft Support Reimagine. We know that Microsoft Support, a lot of the options out there aren't for everybody. It doesn't give businesses what they need. So we'll be kind of talking about the experience of getting support for your Microsoft environment with different providers, whether it's going direct or, doing a different CSP or with us, and kind of what that looks like and how you can find the best support option for you. I see that we have a lot of questions. Thank you, Nico, for touching on the licensing. If you guys have any more questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A module. We also have some questions that we got sent early on. So if you guys ever have any questions and we're doing a webinar, you can feel free to email us that question and we will get to it live. So our first question is, for companies just getting started with Azure, what should be their first step to secure their infrastructure?
I'll let Jorge kind of break down that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like we talked about before, the well-architected framework is that industry standard for cloud across all clouds, AWS, GCP, and Azure. The other part is the cloud adoption framework. So it's adopting moving to that cloud first approach. So what you want to do first is an assessment, a discovery of what you're trying to do, what your current business is and how you currently operate, and then moving to that cloud first. So what we like to do is an assessment, look at your environment, see how we can secure it based on security needs, what industry you're in, and what you want to do as far as, a lot of times we see that an organization wants to give their application teams more ability to do things in a cloud first approach, but also setting guardrails and expectations up so that they can do that, so they can learn early on how to do these applications. So what we say first is foremost, getting in there and having us do some kind of assessment or some kind of discovery and moving and building out this landing zone where you have all these guardrails and things set up, so that what it becomes is just dumping resources in there. And I know it sounds kind of rough, but just kind of moving things in, and hey, everything's secure because we did the initial work in the beginning, and we secured our environment and we set guardrails.
Yeah, to kind of piggyback off on that, here at Trusted Tech Team, we do a CAF assessment here complimentary. So we use things like Azure Migrate to understand what your environment looks like, what it's going to cost you, what resources we're going to need to pivot to. Are we going to refactor? Are we going to remodernize? That's why it's super important for us to come and do that assessment first, right? So whether you're starting from scratch, or you're cleaning up an inherited mess that you typically do. You accrue some tech debt, or maybe you're starting as a new director, or you're starting a new security operation, right? We want to make sure you are standing up your new environment, or you're scaling your environment with consistent, proven methodologies that have been kind of stress tested in this space. So doing that assessment, us getting to know you, and then us providing our consultation is going to be that first step here of making sure you are moving into the cloud securely.
Yeah. So the big thing too is, right, it's a lot of you guys want to know what's my ROI on this, right? So if I have old hardware, I'm ready to move out of either buy new data center hardware, or I want to move into one of the clouds. So what does that mean? Azure Migrate gives us the ability to look at all your resources and say, well, some of this stuff can't go. You have Windows 2000 server, sorry, right? And that's Microsoft. And then there's, hey, this is what it would cost you getting that, because we're moving from a CapEx model to an OpEx model when we move into the cloud. And so that, but I also wanted to point out that a lot of times, and this is what happened to me before I went into consulting, worked for a company, they said, we want to go to Azure. We were in Rackspace, we want to go to Azure, it's supposed to be cheaper. So we went in there, we started building everything out. And then later on, they're like, well, is it secure? And we're like, I don't know. You said build this stuff out. So I know there's a lot of people out there. So there comes that second point of us going in there and just doing a security assessment and looking and be like, yeah, don't worry, we can fix this though. So don't feel helpless.
Yeah.
Love it. Cool. Another question that we have is, if my organization uses hybrid infrastructure, does secure score still apply across the board?
Yes, 100% it does. We can use other aspects of Defender to tie off on security score. So if you do have on-premise infrastructure, security is still a big concern. We want to establish, within Azure, there's things like Azure Arc that allows us to give, visibility onto resources outside of the Microsoft environment, right? We want to intrinsically stop thinking Microsoft is this, or Azure is this bubble where we don't have peering abilities to other aspects of my organizations. For example, if I am multi-cloud or I am on-premise or hybrid, I want to understand that Azure has the capabilities to scale out into these different parts of the organization to really understand, all right, what am I protecting? How am I going to apply Defender for Cloud to those resources? I'm going to use something like Azure Arc. For example, you'll see commonly now, if organizations are doing this correctly with Defender for Cloud implementations, they are not going the tried and true method of deploying an agent on a server and then getting that data ingested into Defender portal. They're going to use the Azure Arc methodology, where you deploy Azure Arc agent onto the on-premise servers. Then you apply the Defender for Cloud subscription to monitor that resource, and you build the infrastructure around that resource, right? So it allows Azure to be a single pane of glass when it comes to monitoring all of my resources on-premise or within the cloud. So I want to highlight that is super important when it comes to deploying Defender for Cloud for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, to add on to that too, there's a lot of times a thought where, okay, if I do cloud, I have to do all Azure. That's not true. Most organizations are somewhat of a hybrid, right? You get most of your stuff up there, but there's legacy software that probably can't go or may stay for whatever reason, or you have branch offices that may still need because you're not going to put a bigger internet connection there or site-to-site connection. So then, that allows that you still need to have that there. So when we talk hybrid, I would say hybrid is the most common scenario.
Great point. We have another good question. Can you explain the difference between using NSGs versus an Azure firewall and when you'd use both?
Jorge, you want to go ahead and answer that one, or I can go ahead and break into it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Repeat that question. Sorry about that.
No worries. Can you explain the difference between using NSGs versus Azure firewall and when you would use both?
Yeah, so ideally you would use both. And if it's not an Azure firewall, you would use a third-party firewall. So your firewall is going to catch all your network filtering. It's going to be an active detection for any network attacks or anything networking. And NSG is a dummy firewall, right? It just allows open ports, closed ports. So you would put like an NSG around subnets, and you would say, hey, I don't want any traffic directly coming to this server. And you build that NSG and allow those rules, or only traffic, only port 3389 is allowed on this subnet. Or you don't allow that for, you're just using Azure Bastion. And Azure Firewall allows you to, it's an active firewall. Yeah, and so when you're building out your Azure Firewall, third-party firewall in Azure, and the reason why I say that is because I try to be agnostic with that. I do like Azure Firewall, but say you're in an organization, we've been using Palo Altos. I love Palo Alto as well. That's fine, put that up there. But remember when we create, we put a firewall there, we have to create route tables, which are user-defined routes that forces traffic to the firewall for ingestion, and also, forces it to go out of one single point of out either to the internet or back on premise.
Mhm.
Love it. This is a good question. This is kind of putting you guys on the spot. What makes Trusted Tech Team's Azure infrastructure consultation unique compared to tools like Microsoft's built-in recommendations?
Well, Microsoft's built-in recommendations are going to be, with a lack of better words, going to be very cookie cutter. They are going to be very without thought or reason. What I've seen in the past with organizations just deploying out the recommendations provided within Microsoft. Microsoft has done a phenomenal job in deploying machine learning and AI throughout their entire their tenants, providing good context to people who haven't been in the space long enough. But as you're traversing and you're, kind of figuring things out, you'll realize as Microsoft provides their best practice, which is it's inherently good, it also can cause a lot of strain on your organization. So, for example, MFA was a widely accepted practice, and we all understand as architects and IT experts, yeah, we want MFA on everything. But it took widely from 2016, 2017, all the way to, I think this year, Microsoft did a forced implementation of MFA and conditional access to their entire organizations, even if you're a non-privileged user. It still took, relatively a long time for people to start adopting it and build out workarounds to make sure they don't break authentication models, like legacy authentication models, right? That's an extremely important concept to understand. Because so when Microsoft does recommend something within their baselines or their recommendations, it's important how it affects the organization as a whole in entirety, and then allow you grander thought of thinking to make sure that, hey, I'm not going to put my organization in a state of disruption, right? So coming to talk to us and getting a consultation, we are going to recommend the same practices, but we're going to also identify a lot of inherent risks that come when implementing those practices, right? That's would be the key differences between like leaning on either an AI service or Microsoft service to provide you, architecture recommendations and actually speaking to someone. And there's no cost when you come talk to me. This is provided when you have an account here hosted with TTT. If you do any type of licensing with us, you guys can come talk to me whenever. I'm an open book. I love to give information. I love to teach. So that's I would say the biggest differentiators between us and Microsoft.
Yeah, I would say this too. So when it comes to the Azure security benchmark and doing that zero trust, any CISO, any security guy would tell you, I want to be there, but that doesn't necessarily always make sense when we talk about what's best for the organization, right? There's always an operational cost to doing business, and securing ourselves from the world is really just disconnecting from the internet. That's the only way, right? So it's never always 100% what we can do. So what we give you, like I said, I've been consulting for 10 years, doing 14 years. We have a whole architect team that has worked with industries and has this kind of, like, I've seen that before, and I'm going to tell you why it's going to fail. And that's what we give you. It's like, we want to secure you all the way, but it's also like, hey, it doesn't work like that, or you're gonna have to do that, and it is additional cost sometimes when you're doing things a certain way. So that's what we give. That's really at the bottom line. That's what you call consultant for, really. So
yeah, I mean, let me step on those landmines for you is essentially how I like to paint it, right? Because me, Jorge, and Adrian, we live and breathe this stuff every day. It is our job to stay up to date on this. So we want to make sure that, as you're coming to talk to us, we've experienced the pain, and we don't want you to experience that same pain.
Yeah, just one last point on that. Jorge and Nico mentioned, I think the key word here is adoption. Microsoft is going to make all these recommendations, but if it's not feasible for your organization or to have that understanding to where you can administer it properly, that's going to make a big overall impact on how secure your environment is. So any recommendations comes way where our expertise is, as I mentioned, we live and breathe this every day. And so not only can we evaluate, any recommendations or some of the things that we do ourselves may not necessarily be in line with what they recommended, but overall the easier administrative burden on it and give you understanding throughout Azure from the description level, containers, tags, everything in between.
It's a great place to end it on, I think. So thank you guys. Thank you guys to the speakers, Nico, Jorge, Adrian. You guys did amazing, just telling us everything end to end about Azure security, giving that overview. I know that there's a lot of talk around this. So if you guys have any questions, you guys can always reach out to us. Like Nico said, you can get that consultation. We will do that for you and you will get tailored recommendations. And yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We will send that email afterwards. It'll come typically about 2 days after with both some resources for you guys and the actual recording. So if there's anything, you want to look back on, you can definitely do that. I want to say a huge thank you guys to everybody for tuning in and sharing your questions and engaging with us. We love, Azure, we love M365, but most of all, we really just love talking to you guys. It's just been a great pleasure. So thank you guys. I hope to see you guys on the next one. And again, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.
Thank you.